At 11:42 p.m. on December 29th, the city of Chicago looks like a circuit board made of ice and gold. From the 42nd floor of the Vance Tower, the cars below are just flickering data points, moving in a rhythm I spent the last decade learning how to predict. My name is Elena Vance, and while the rest of the world was prepping champagne and glitter for New Year's Eve, I was sitting under the hum of recessed LED lights, staring at a $500 million strategic partnership agreement. My fingers were hovering over the final diligence packet for Vance Global Technologies. This wasn't just a contract, it was the culmination of 3,000 days of silence, missed sleep, and the kind of grit that turns a messy startup phase into a market-disrupting empire. I was tired, yes, but it was the clean and sharp fatigue of a runner nearing the tape. Then my phone buzzed. It was a text from my sister, Olivia. I didn't even have to open it to feel the familiar chill of her condescension. "Elena," it read, "about the New Year's Eve dinner at the estate. We've been talking. Mom, Dad, and I think it's best if you skip this one. Daniel's partners are coming, and we really need the night to be seamless. Your vibe is a bit too intense for the aesthetic we're going for. Let's do brunch in February when things are quieter. Hope you understand." I read it twice, not because I didn't understand the words, but because I was fascinated by the audacity. I looked at the document in front of me. My signature, Elena Vance, CEO, was the only thing standing between Daniel Whitmore's firm and a catastrophic fiscal quarter. And here was his fiancé, my sister, telling me I wasn't seamless enough for a dinner table. I didn't reply. I didn't have to. I just sat there, listening to the silence of my office. For years, my family had assigned me a role, the complicated daughter, the one who worked in tech but never quite explained what she did, the one who wore blazers instead of silk dresses, the one whose life was too messy, too loud, and too focused on things they couldn't brag about at a country club. They thought I was struggling. They thought my refusal to ask for help was a sign of failure rather than a sign of absolute independence. They wanted a polished fantasy to sell to Daniel's colleagues, a family of legacy and grace, untainted by a daughter who looked like she spent too much time in boardrooms and not enough time at the salon. 10 minutes later, the follow-up came. Olivia didn't like silence. She mistook it for a wound she could salt. She called. "Elena, did you get my message?" Her voice was that practiced, airy tone she used when she was being particularly cruel. She called it being civilized. "I got it," I said. My voice was flat, professional. The same voice I used to negotiate Series B funding. "Good. Look, don't be dramatic. It's just that Daniel is on the verge of the biggest deal of his career. These investors he's bringing over, they expect a certain level of refinement. You tend to talk about work, and your startup thing is just so—" She paused, searching for a word that wouldn't sound like a slur but would feel like one. "Unpredictable. We need Daniel to look like he comes from a stable, traditional background. Your presence just raises too many questions we don't want to answer right now." "Questions about what, Olivia?" I asked. I leaned back in my chair, looking at the logo of my company etched into the glass wall. "About your lifestyle. The hours you keep. The fact that you don't have a real social standing yet. It's about his image, Elena. Try to be mature for once and let someone else have the spotlight. Just disappear for the night. For him." I felt something inside me go completely still. It wasn't anger. It was a profound, crystalline clarity. They were protecting a man who was, at that very moment, desperately trying to schedule a meeting with me. They were treating me like a smudge on a window while I was the architect of the skyscraper they were standing in. "Understood," I said. "Wait, really? No argument?" Olivia sounded almost disappointed. She lived for the drama of my supposed instability. "No argument. Enjoy your dinner, Olivia. Give my best to Daniel. And I'm sure he'll get exactly what he deserves this week." I hung up before she could respond. My phone buzzed again. My mother, sending a sympathy text about how they were doing this for my own good so I wouldn't feel out of place. Then my father, 5 minutes later, telling me that maturity meant knowing when to step back for the sake of the family's future. The final blow came from Aunt Renee. "Just disappear for once, Elena. Stop making everything about you." I stared at that last message for a long time. Stop making everything about you. The irony was thick enough to choke on. I had spent 5 years making nothing about me. I had kept my head down. I had moved my company from a basement to a mid-rise, then to this tower. I had stayed silent during every Thanksgiving when they praised Daniel's ascent in the financial world, even though I knew his firm was hemorrhaging talent and desperate for a bailout. I had let them believe I was the failure because it was easier than explaining a world they weren't smart enough to understand. But the silence was over. I turned back to my monitor. I sent a single internal message to my chief of staff. "Sarah, confirm the January 2nd diligence meeting. Add a clause to the security protocol. Only authorized personnel on the elevator list. No exceptions for family emergencies. And Sarah, make sure my name is on the digital display in the lobby. Full font, no abbreviations." I spent New Year's Eve alone in that office. While the fireworks erupted over the lake and my family toasted to Daniel's clean image in their suburban mansion, I was dissecting his firm's liability reports. I watched the countdown on a small monitor while eating cold Thai food, surrounded by the only thing that had never lied to me: data. Daniel Whitmore thought he was coming to Vance Global to save his career by partnering with a faceless tech giant. He had no idea the face of that giant was the woman he had just agreed to erase from his dinner table. As the clock struck midnight, I didn't make a resolution. I made a move. I signed the final digital authorization. The stage was set. In 48 hours, the family hierarchy was going to collide with the reality of the global market. They wanted me to disappear? Fine, I would disappear from their table. But on January 2nd, they would have to find a way to look me in the eye when they realized I owned the room they were begging to enter. January 2nd arrived bright, sharp, and cold enough to make the Chicago skyline look like it was cut from brushed metal. I was at the office before sunrise, not because I was nervous, but because ritual steadies me before war. I stood at the far end of the boardroom, looking at the long white oak table where, in less than an hour, several powerful people would sit and decide the trajectory of Vance Global Technologies. The room was designed to intimidate without seeming to try. Glass walls, recessed lighting, and a 12-foot screen that displayed our current expansion metrics. At each seat sat a leather folder embossed with our logo, and inside, a confidentiality addendum with my full title listed clearly on the final page: Elena Vance, Founder and Chief Executive Officer. I wondered if that line would be enough to shock Daniel when he saw it. In the end, I decided it didn't matter. Whether he noticed my name first, my face first, or the data first, reality was coming for him. My COO, Sarah, arrived at 8:45 a.m. She took one look at me, my charcoal gray tailored suit, my hair pulled back into a sharp knot, my expression unreadable, and she just nodded. She knew. She had been with me when we were coding in a garage with no heat. She knew exactly what this deal meant, and she knew exactly who Daniel Whitmore was. "The elevators are locked down," Sarah whispered. "Security has the list. The external partners are arriving now." At 9:03, the guests began filing in. An attorney, a risk officer, a managing director from the firm, and 2 integration specialists. They shook my hand, thanked me for hosting, and spoke to me exactly the way serious professionals speak to one another when titles have already been validated by work. No one asked where the founder was. No one assumed I was support staff. Then, at 9:07, the doors opened one last time. Daniel Whitmore walked in mid-conversation, holding his leather portfolio and wearing the expression of a man who believed the room was his for the taking. He was laughing at something the colleague behind him said. His eyes were down, scanning his watch, until he reached the table. When his eyes lifted and landed on me at the head of that table, he stopped so abruptly that the man behind him nearly walked into his shoulder. It was almost cinematic. First came the confusion. His brain was trying to place me, the messy startup sister who was supposedly too intense for a New Year's Eve dinner, in a boardroom worth 9 figures. Then came the denial. He looked at the screen, then the logo, then back at me, as if expecting the floor to open up and correct the error. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I simply held his stare with a cold, professional vacuum. "Good morning, Mr. Whitmore," I said. My voice was like ice on steel. "Please take your seat. We have a lot to get through." Daniel sat, but not smoothly. His fingers tightened around his folder so hard the leather creaked. He looked down at the agenda, and there it was, in hard black print, Elena Vance, CEO. I could practically hear his memory reassembling every insult Olivia had thrown at me over the holidays, and every silent agreement he had made to keep me invisible, but arrogance rarely evaporates that fast. Daniel tried to recover. He cleared his throat and attempted to lean into his usual charming expert persona, but his eyes were darting toward the door. He was waiting for something, or someone. Before I could begin the presentation, the vestibule doors behind us burst open. Olivia was there. She was breathing hard, her phone clutched in her hand like a weapon, still wearing the fury of someone who believed she was arriving to correct a catastrophic mistake. She wasn't on the elevator list. She must have lied to reception, claimed a family emergency, and used our last name to bully her way up. "What is this?" she demanded. Her voice was far too loud for the acoustics of the room. It cracked under the strain of her panic. She looked from me to Daniel, then to the managing directors, her face contorting with a mix of horror and entitlement. "Elena, what are you doing here? Daniel, why is she sitting there?" The room went into a brutal, immediate silence. My team remained still, trained to follow my lead. The external partners looked at Olivia like she was a glitch in an otherwise perfect system. Security appeared at the door, but I raised a hand to stop them. "Not yet." Olivia marched toward the table, ignoring the security guards. "There has to be some mistake," she said to Ellen Brooks, the managing director of Daniel's firm. "She can't be the one running this. Elena is... She's the one we told you about, the one with the struggling startup, the one who couldn't even make it to dinner because she's too..." "Olivia, stop," Daniel hissed, his face going pale enough to lose color around the mouth. But Olivia was too far gone in her own narrative. She pointed at me, her finger shaking. "You weren't even supposed to be visible this week, Elena." Daniel needed a clean image. "You're going to ruin everything for him. How did you even get in here?" I let the words hang in the air. I let the clean image comment echo against the glass walls until every person in that room understood exactly what it meant. I watched Ellen Brooks' expression shift from confusion to a deep, professional disgust. "Ms. Carter." "Excuse me, Ms. Vance," Ellen said, turning to me. "Would you like to pause the meeting?" "No," I said. I didn't take my eyes off my sister. "I'd like the meeting to proceed, but since there seems to be some concern about image, perhaps now is a good time to distinguish between perception and credibility." I looked at Olivia. "Olivia, you're in a confidential boardroom during a strategic diligence phase. You are unauthorized, uninvited, and currently, you are the only person in this room creating an image problem for Mr. Whitmore." Olivia laughed, a sharp, disbelieving sound. "You're acting like you own the place, Elena. It's pathetic. Daniel, tell them who she is." Daniel didn't say a word. He couldn't. He sat there like a man watching his own execution, realizing that the woman he had tried to erase was the only person who could save his career, and he had already burnt that bridge to ash. I turned to security. "Please escort my sister to reception. She is to wait there until the meeting concludes. If she makes another sound, have her removed from the building entirely." As security took her arms, Olivia's face changed from rage to a sudden, piercing realization. She looked at the screen, the Vance Global logo, and then at the way my team looked at me. Not with pity, but with absolute, unwavering respect. She realized she hadn't dragged me into her world of social optics. She had dragged herself into my world of power, and she was drowning. Once the door shut behind her, the silence was different. It was the specific corporate silence that means everyone is mentally reorganizing risk. I advanced the slide on the screen. "Now," I said, "let's talk about operational integrity." For the next 20 minutes, I did what years of being underestimated had trained me to do best. I turned competence into pressure. I walked the room through our forecasting engine, our compliance layers, and our burn discipline. Every answer I gave was precise. documented, and quiet. That is how real authority sounds. But Daniel tried one last desperate move. When we reached the governance section, he cleared his throat. "The metrics are impressive," Daniel said, his voice shaky but trying for a professional edge. "But I have to ask about founder volatility. High-growth environments require leaders who are stable. Given the outburst we just witnessed, how can we be sure that personal family dynamics won't interfere with the strategic value of this partnership?" It was a clever question. He wanted to use Olivia's scene, a scene he caused, to frame me as a risk. And I folded my hands on the table. "That's a thoughtful question, Daniel, especially coming from someone whose fiancé just breached security to object to my presence in my own company." The room inhaled. "To answer your question with facts," I continued, "Vance Global has an independent advisory board and a crisis continuity plan that triggers founder recusal in cases of genuine volatility. However, I'm more interested in external partnership risk. Specifically, the risk posed when a representative, like yourself, privately forms judgments about leadership based on social optics, or whether a founder fits a clean image in a holiday setting." I pulled a document from my folder, the correspondence Daniel had sent to Ellen's firm weeks ago. "In your pre-meeting requests, Daniel, you asked for context on the founder's social readiness and public-facing stability. The overlap in language between your professional notes and my sister's text messages on New Year's Eve is hard to ignore." Ellen Brooks leaned back in her chair. She looked at Daniel, then at the documents. "Daniel, did you know Ms. Vance was the founder before entering this room?" "No," Daniel said, "but that shouldn't—" "Did you ever express reservations about this deal based on personal history?" Ellen interrupted. Daniel hesitated. That hesitation told the room everything. He had spent his career believing that being a rising man meant you could edit the truth to fit your ambition. He forgot that in this room, data is the only truth that matters. "I think we need a break," Ellen said. Her voice was flat. "Daniel, and please step out with me in council. Ms. Vance will be back in 10 minutes. When they left, Sarah slid a note across the table. "He's done. They can't risk the liability of his bias now." I looked out the window at the city. 2 days ago, I was told to disappear. Now, the man who wanted me gone was being sacrificed by his own firm to protect a deal with me. But the story wasn't over. My family was still waiting downstairs, and they had no idea that the disappointment of the family had just become the most powerful person they would ever know. 10 minutes after Daniel was escorted out, the air in the boardroom finally felt breathable. Ellen Brooks didn't offer a superficial apology. She didn't call what happened unfortunate. She looked me dead in the eye and said, "Ms. Vance, at this level, judgment is our only real currency. Mr. Whitmore just declared bankruptcy. Let's make sure this partnership doesn't do the same." We signed the term sheet at 11:45 a.m. By 1 p.m., the memorandum was digitized, the national pilot was locked, and Daniel Whitmore's name had been systematically scrubbed from every file related to Vance Global. He wasn't just off the deal. He was a liability being managed by a legal team. "Would you like to exit through the private garage?" Sarah asked as I gathered my things. She knew who was waiting downstairs. "No," I said, sliding my laptop into my bag. "I've spent enough time using back doors to avoid making people uncomfortable. Today, we use the lobby." The walk from the boardroom to the elevators is usually a blur of glass and steel, but today, every step felt like it was reclaiming ground. When the doors opened on the ground floor, the sound hit me first. The hum of 100 people who knew exactly who I was. My staff didn't know about the drama upstairs, not yet, but they knew the deal had closed. As I walked across the polished marble, the receptionist stood. My lead developers, coming back from lunch, stopped and started to clap. It wasn't a movie moment. It was the quiet, earned respect of a team that had watched their leader bleed for this company for years. And there, in the guest lounge, a space designed for people waiting for a chance to speak to someone important, sat my family. Olivia stood up so fast she nearly tripped over her designer handbag. Her mascara was a ruined map of panic across her face. My parents stood behind her, looking like they had just realized they were standing in a cathedral dedicated to a god they didn't believe in. I didn't stop. I walked straight to the center of the lobby, and they scrambled to meet me. "Elena!" Olivia hissed, her voice vibrating with a mixture of fury and desperation. "What did you do?" "Daniel just texted me. He's been suspended. They're reviewing his ethics. You set him up. You knew he was coming here and you let him walk into a trap." I stopped and looked at her. I didn't look at her like a sister. I looked at her like a failing metric. "I didn't set a trap, Olivia. I set a meeting. Daniel set the trap for himself the moment he decided that my image was a threat to his career. All I did was show up to my job." My father stepped forward, his face a brittle mask of paternal authority that no longer had any teeth. "Elena, this has gone too far. This is family. You've humiliated your sister's fiancé in front of his entire firm. Do you have any idea what this does to our reputation? To her engagement?" "Reputation?" I asked, my voice calm enough to make him flinch. "You weren't worried about reputation when you told me to disappear 2 days ago. You were worried about optics. You wanted a version of the truth that was easy to swallow. Well, here is the hard truth. The messy startup you laughed at just saved Daniel's firm from a catastrophic year. And the only reason Daniel is in trouble is because he was caught being exactly who you trained him to be, someone who values the frame more than the picture." Aunt Renee tried to chime in, her voice shrill. "You're being dramatic, Elena. You always were. So you've had some success. Fine. But to ruin a man's career over a dinner invitation?" "It wasn't a dinner invitation, Aunt Renee," I said, turning to her. "It was an attempt at erasure. You asked me to be invisible so you could feel polished. You wanted me to stay in the shadows while I was paying for the lights. I didn't ruin Daniel's career. His bias did. His arrogance did. His belief that he could treat the founder of this company like a family secret did." My mother was the only one who didn't speak. She was looking around the lobby, at the Vance Global logo, at the security team, at the professionals who were looking at me with admiration. For the first time in 32 years, she wasn't seeing the difficult daughter, she was seeing the architect, and the shame on her face was finally, blessedly quiet. "I have a press release to approve," I said, stepping around them. "Elena, wait!" Olivia grabbed my arm. Her entitlement was dying, replaced by a raw, ugly fear. "You have to fix this. Call Ellen. Tell her it was a misunderstanding. Tell her we're a close family and it was just holiday stress. If you don't, the wedding is off. Everything I've built is gone." I gently removed her hand from my sleeve. "The difference between us, Olivia, is that I built something that requires competence. You built something that requires a lie. I'm not going to lie to save a structure that was designed to exclude me." I walked toward the elevators, the sound of my heels echoing like a countdown. Behind me, I heard Olivia start to cry, that loud, performative sob she used to get her way when we were kids. But for the first time, nobody moved to comfort her, not even my father. The truth was too heavy now. It had crushed the fantasy they lived in. By evening, the world had changed. Daniel was removed from the deal file entirely. Within a month, he was transitioned to a back-office role with no path to partnership. Olivia's engagement didn't survive the spring, not because of the meeting, but because she couldn't forgive Daniel for being weak, and he couldn't forgive her for being the one who led him into the lion's den. My parents still call. I answer sometimes. But the Sunday dinners are different now. They don't tell me to be softer. They don't ask when I'm going to get a real job. They sit in the silence I've created, realizing that the rules of the room are now mine. People ask me if I feel guilty. They ask if success is really the best revenge. The truth is, revenge is too small a word for this. Revenge is about them. Sovereignty is about you. I didn't build Vance Global to spite my family. I built it because I knew I was worth more than the space they had carved out for me. I built it because when the world tells you to disappear, the only logical response is to become so bright that they can't look away even if they want to. If you're watching this, and you're currently the inconvenient person in your circle, if you're the one being told to play small so everyone else can stay comfortable, I have one piece of advice for you. Let them have their polished dinner. Let them keep their clean images. Use that silence to build your empire. So work in the dark, grow in the shadows, and master your craft until your name is the one on the agenda they can't avoid. Because one day, the doors will open. You will walk into the room you were never supposed to enter. You will sit at the head of the table. And when the people who underestimated you stop cold at the sight of you, do not flinch. Let them see exactly who they tried to hide. My name is Elena Vance. I was asked to disappear for one night. Instead, I became impossible to erase, and that is the only success that matters.